6:50 p.m. and the State Board of Education will reconvene the interviews for State Superintendent of Public Instruction. And the next item on today's agenda is the interview of Dr. Thomas Ahart. And you can come on to the table, Dr. Ahart.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We will go ahead and get started. And if you give me a minute to get myself back together, I will start with the first question.
It's okay.
Okay, so let's start all over. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And welcome to the table. So I'll start by asking you to tell us about a time when you had to make a difficult ethical decision in your leadership role. What was the situation? What did you do? And what was the outcome?
Well, I might as well start with a pretty recent one. During the pandemic, um, I will spare you all of the background, although that is important to the political context. We arrived at a point where in Des Moines, where my board, who was given the power by the governor to make decisions about in-person or virtual instruction, um, decided to stay in virtual instruction despite having been denied a waiver by the State Department of Education. So I was in the position of either honoring my board's 7-0 vote and violate the state's emergency rules, or not follow my board's 7-0 vote and honor the state's emergency rules. I chose to honor my board's decision, and ethically, I was really in a catch-22 because in the end, two individuals, one from my district and one from way outside my district, filed complaints with the Board of Educational Examiners and accused me of violating the code of ethics. Had I made the other decision, the exact same complaint could have been made. So, you know, in all, we were in a position to really serve our students effectively because of the work my team and I had done prior to the pandemic, and we had responded to the pandemic very, very early. So we were much better positioned, and I knew that for the health and safety of our district, having a school board and a superintendent at cross purposes was going to harm everyone. So that's that's what happened, and that's why I made the decision. I didn't think it was the best decision.
Thanks.
This question is related to vision and outcomes-oriented, an outcomes-oriented question.
Okay.
What is your vision for public education in Michigan over the next 5 years? And how would you ensure measurable improvement in student outcomes statewide?
Okay, broad question, important one. We need to accelerate third grade reading proficiency dramatically. There's a number of ways I think that from the Department of Education we can help facilitate that. One is, you know, establishing what is best practice for instruction and ensuring that all schools understand what that is and that we're providing support for those schools that don't. We need to make sure that we are not just taking end of the year measures, but I think if there were a way, and I'm not sure exactly what the mechanics would be in Michigan, but I think it could be figured out, where schools can be having appropriate benchmarks, especially regarding third grade literacy, so kindergarten through third grade, and that those benchmark measurements over the course of the year were made public, instead of the entire community looking backward as an autopsy at the end of the year. I think there could be more accountability from the local community if they understood what was transpiring over the course of the year more accurately. The next piece of that is working with school boards to talk, to be focusing more on student outcomes as part of their basic work. There are a couple of different models out there, one of which is called student outcomes focused governance, which, and I know it kind of backwards and forwards because we implemented this in Des Moines. I think we were the first district in the country actually to do it. So the board receives training, of course, but they measure how much time at each board meeting they're spending talking about student outcomes. And the idea is that it's over 50% of the time. And so what happens is, and I'm simplifying this for the sake of time, but the board starts talking about what's happening with our students and spends a lot less time with things that are, 2 or 3 or 4 degrees removed from what's actually happening with students. Letting those sort of mechanical things that are important and must be done by boards to take place largely on the first part of the agenda, the consent agenda, and actually be talking and having discussions with, not just with principals and central office team, but also students and families about what's transpiring in our classrooms. Why are we where we are right now? And what do we need to change to get to where we need to be? That helps not only the board put more focus, obviously, on student achievement, but it also greatly narrows the focus of the entire district staff because they know all of their work is being put on, public display once a month or twice a month. And it opens a very big window to the community to understand better what's happening over the course of the year because they're breaking down the data and, looking not just at total district or building level results, but breaking it down by different groups. So are we effectively serving our English language learners? Are we effectively serving our males of color, for instance? And then each district who uses this sets SMART goals, 3 to 5 year SMART goals that are specific to where they're having their largest challenges. So in Des Moines, our first round with this, we had third grade black male reading as an area of focus. We had ninth grade algebra completion as another area of focus, just for example. So one of the things that happens, my personal perspective, in most every state is where schools are overwhelmed with this huge range of requirements that schools must fulfill. We and I'm not saying any of those things are unimportant, but we need to put clear emphasis on those areas that are going to give us the biggest bang for our educational investment. A lot of things are going to sort of just happen, and school boards don't need to pay a whole lot of attention to that. They should, but they don't need to be spending their public meeting time doing that. They need to send the message to the community that this is what's most important and help bring community support into what's happening in the schools so that the entire community can share in that focus and can share in bringing that support. The other thing, speaking in the next 3 to 5 years with Michigan's education plan is, and I think this makes a huge difference, especially for our students who qualify for free and reduced price lunch. And that is, we need to start talking in much more concrete terms. I would say, even as early as 6th grade, what their opportunities are after graduation, and really actively emphasizing that with the students and with their families, and doing a much better job of making clear what the real opportunities are in their communities and around the state for employment if they successfully graduate, and by selecting what sort of emphasis they want to have through high school and making that a much more strategic decision rather than kind of a, I ran out of time and now I just was defaulted into, into this route. I think we wait too long to have serious conversations with our students and families about making choices that are going to impact them well beyond their time in the K-12 system. I think we can do a much better job of that without spending a lot more money, by the way, doing it, but really making that emphasis clear. So in summary, what I'm talking about doing is making very clear from the state level, here's where we really need to emphasize areas for improvement for our schools and drive that home. Because as we all know, if you have too many priorities, you don't have any priorities. So if we want to get real about catching up, and raising our rank in third grade reading, we definitely can do that. But we can't do that and a dozen other priorities, or it won't be a priority.
This next question is about deep educational and systems experience.
Mhm.
How has your experience as an educator informed your approach to system level leadership? Share an example where your teaching or educational leadership experience influenced a district or state policy.
Okay, I started my career as a high school teacher. I taught for 11 years before I left the classroom. I went into teaching because I really wanted to have an impact, positive impact on the lives of young people. I never intended to become a principal. That wasn't a job that appealed to me. I think largely that was because of who my exposure had been with, both as a student and as a teacher. None of those guys had jobs that I thought that I wanted. And they also didn't have jobs that I thought had very much impact on me as a student. When I was a teacher, I got my master's of public administration, knowing I wanted to be in a leadership role in public service. But I thought that if I had to become a principal, I probably wasn't going to stay in education. It turns out that I did. I found, opportunities to do that. But when I became a principal, and this really did impact how I worked beyond that, I knew instruction. And I also knew how to look at data. So as a middle school principal, when I realized that most of my students were way, way below proficient, and that even though it wasn't typical, our students needed instruction in fluency, in reading fluency. And usually you're finished with that before a student leaves elementary school. So I had to retrain my staff and ensure that we were giving the students exactly what it was that they needed so that they could progress. Um, and to me, that just seemed really logical. My other 9 middle school principal colleagues, who are much more veteran than me, asked me, how come you're doing that? I said, because we're failing, and I'm not going to let kids continue to fail in my school. They're going to be ready for North High School when they leave here. Otherwise, we're a fraud. you know. Um, Moving into the superintendent position, and this was an observation that I had made as a consultant before, is something a misstep in my view that public education has made writ large is putting people into leadership positions, supervising teachers who have never been in the classroom long enough to understand what good instruction is, let alone how to coach it in someone else. And so we doubled down on that theory when I was superintendent, and we insisted on instructional leadership from our principals. And that's something that I think as a State Department of Education, we could provide a tremendous amount of support to our districts, especially our smaller districts who are more resource scarce. Because some people went into the principalship because they like all of those management type things. But if you design your system, as we did in Des Moines, we mapped everything backwards from the teacher in the classroom with the student, and we removed as many administrative roles from our principals as we could, with the expectation that they're spending their time in the classroom. And so our supervisors, our principal supervisors, we did the same thing. Their job was to be with the principals, providing them coaching and feedback, helping them work with teachers so that we had true instructional improvement happening on a day after day after day basis. And it changed the entire tenor of our discussions around the school. So we have to look at things that maybe seem that they just have to be present in schools and help our school districts find ways to deconstruct some longstanding practices that haven't yielded the results that we need, and really put our focus in an informed way on those areas where we really need to improve. And so once we made that shift in DMPS, then we started training our own principals, and we rarely hired a principal from outside the district because we had very high expectations for what kind of support they could give our teachers. We went back to the sort of the original concept of a principal, which was the principal teacher, and make sure that the people running our schools had the expertise to bring the best out in our teachers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Madam President,
Yes.
follow up? So that's how you did it in Des Moines.
Hmm.
How do you do that at the state level?
Well, actually, we actually helped our state put this into motion, and the thing that worked. So our state had done, and I'm not being critical of the Iowa Department of Ed or the Colorado Department of Ed that I've worked under as well. Sometimes we are sharing practices that districts already pretty much understand. And we're providing a service maybe that's really important to a small percentage of our schools, and a lot of our districts are maybe rolling their eyes or working really hard to get some benefit out of what it is that we're presenting. And so I don't believe in a kind of a one size fits all, but I think if we provide a model out there for what best practice looks like, and we've been part of Wallace Foundation research that is very explicit that it makes a huge difference if you construct it this way. And then, we help schools or districts assess where they are and then provide supports to get them to where we understand best practice to be. So I don't see it as, I see it more of a sort of an opting in, because I do believe in local control. I'm a huge fan of local control, especially when we're looking at, Michigan, where you have some very large population centers, but predominantly you have very small or relatively small districts, and their student populations look different, their communities look different, their needs are different, their context is different. So let's not pretend like we have the one solution that's the same for everybody. But I think that there are some structural things that have been largely unexamined in public education that we can put out there and then provide specific support that's unique to where an individual school district is, if they choose. If they're failing and they choose not to partake, then that opens up a different discussion for us.
Okay, I also have the next question.
Okay.
Describe a specific initiative you've led that addressed educational inequities or closed opportunity gaps. What data or feedback informed your approach, and what were the results?
I'll talk about one of the things that is still serving our district really well and was a huge change, not just for teachers and students, but also for families and the community. And that was moving from a traditional grading system to a standards referenced grading system. I think we take, speaking very broadly here, but I think we take grades too much in stride, and they ought to be a very useful source of data. And when I looked at grades that our system was putting out by grade level, and then looked at how we were testing with the ACT or the Iowa Test of Educational Development or ASVAB, there was precious little alignment. And so my assessment was we were lying to our students and we were lying to our families, because if my son, for instance, I have an 8th grader, if he's testing at, or if he's getting straight A's, then I expect that he's testing at career and college ready on whatever, whatever level of exam he takes that year. If that's not happening, then there's pretty significant misalignment. And it's confusing to students and it's confusing to families, and it sort of obfuscates the entire educational process. So shifting to a standards referenced measure where behavior, attendance, those important things are not part of the letter grade, but the letter grade is determined by what that student has been able to demonstrate consistently over the course of a semester or year, aligned with the standards for that course. That's really going to tell us what the student knows and knows how to do, and where our gaps are. And it helps teachers focus as well, because the curricula for a standard class should take about, somewhere around 70%, 75% of the time in that course over the course of a year. And so teachers have flexibility in where they invest their time. And so we want them to have data that's meaningful to them, that tells them where it is that they need to be making that additional investment. What we saw from that in Des Moines was a significant increase in our students of color and our students in poverty testing at the proficient level on the state test, and a significant, even bigger jump in the total number of students testing at advanced proficient. And what we saw from students was a much higher engagement in their grades, because all of the things that privileged students, for instance, know how to do, sort of because they were brought up with it. They know the game of school, and so they can do things that don't reflect their learning, but help them earn a higher grade. And you have students who don't have a history of a family history of success in school, who don't understand how to play the game of school, who are getting who are being told that they're not capable in what you name the subject. And it's not because of what they know and what they can do, it's because of a bunch of ancillary issues. And so, and I'm not saying those ancillary issues aren't important, but when students experience success based on what they know and they can demonstrate to their teacher, you certainly get a lot higher level of focus, and we really have a clearer picture of where a teacher or a building or a district needs to put their investment, because they really know how their students are performing, because it's not muddied by a bunch of ancillary things that don't really reflect learning.
Thanks.
Just a quick follow-up, and I know time's kind of short. With foster care students here in Michigan, we have a situation where students, when they're transferring school to school, family to family, their transcripts are not following them, and then they can't graduate because they can't prove that they've had the classes. It's quite an issue here. Plus, the authority, or actually just the ability for the biological parents to understand what's going on with their students at the current school, because of all these transfers, aren't following them as well. And so if you were to be hired and this board as a body decided to instruct you to get this solved in a reasonable time, whether it's a half FTE ombudsman for foster kids or whatever, would you be willing to commit to getting that done in a reasonable amount of time?
Yes, absolutely. There's nothing that's going to accelerate a dropout more than that situation that you just described. Yes, for sure.
All right, next question is, in your capacity, could you please share with us a time you had to respond to the community or a group that felt marginalized or unheard? And how did you approach the scenario or the situation? And what were your takeaways? What did you learn from it?
When I became a principal, which was my first job in Des Moines, which is a very, very diverse district, it was immediately evident that the vast majority of my families would have described themselves as marginalized and sending their students to a system that was not serving them. And so the first lesson I learned is I have to be an excellent listener. That's that's the first thing, is to stay, to stay even and open and listen. The second thing I learned is that you need to establish a relationship so that you can have real conversation over time. As superintendent, my part of my practice was establishing with a number of community organizations, including our local NAACP, our local LULAC. We actually had two local LULAC organizations. We had an Asian Latino Alliance. We had a very large faith community. Any organization that touched students in any way, I built relationships with. So we could have conversations where I could share information that was coming up that might help us ease, a transition, or they can tell me things that are problematic in their circles that maybe I haven't, that maybe hasn't been on my radar. But the key is having established a relationship so that you can have honest conversations and actually do real problem solving and not wait until there's an emergency that you need to respond to 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 initiate the relationship. So, for instance, one of the things when we had I had all these groups that I met with regularly. When we had a huge influx of ICE raids in Des Moines, we were very proactive in making sure that we had a structure in place in the event that a student were in essence, abandoned. And it wasn't just the district doing, all the work, but we made sure that we had all the partners in the community connected and had ways to communicate. In the winter, or sorry, the summer of 20, um, while we had set up a dozen different meetings with our community to help them understand what return to learn would look like in the fall of 20, just as we were in the pandemic. And right before we started those meetings, George Floyd was murdered, just 3 hours up the road from us. So we immediately changed the agenda for those meetings to be discussions about race and racism and how we interact with law enforcement. And we had great community dialogue that the school sponsored, not the city, not the county, not anyone else, because that immediately impacted, obviously, our kids. So I'm not sure I'm quite getting at the heart of your question, because you asked for one example.
Well, yeah, that's fine. It was about how you responded to the community or group that
Yeah.
felt unheard or marginalized, and then give us the example, and then what did you learn from it? So I think you tried to touch all of the bases.
What I learned is that I always have blind spots, and so I have to make sure that I'm actively engaging with with all facets of the community. Otherwise, I'm going to miss important details that can help us improve how we impact the outcomes for kids.
All right. Could you describe a situation where your communication style helped resolve a conflict or build trust across a diverse group of stakeholders?
Yes. Oh, you want me to describe? I thought, wow, I'm going to save some time here. Yeah, this was a kind of this one isn't, it has to do with education, but it's not academic. in Des Moines, there's our East Side High School is East High and is almost 100% black and brown students and over 90% free and reduced price lunch. And a rumor went around. This happened about 8 or 9 years ago, but a rumor went around, as happens in schools on the regular on social media, that a kid was going to bring a gun to school. We were aware of the rumor. We figured it out. It was not real, but we addressed it, and no harm was going to come. We were very confident of that. The Wednesday, so that happened on a Wednesday. Thursday morning, I get a phone call from the superintendent of Ames Community Schools. The Ames, Iowa is about a half hour north of Des Moines and home of Iowa State, and they were supposed to play East at East Stadium on Friday night. And they said, "Well, you guys can either come up here and play us in Ames, or we'll come down on Saturday afternoon and play East on Saturday afternoon." And I said, "Tim," and I'd known this guy for a long time. I said, "Tim, there will not be a safer place to play a game anywhere in the state than Williams Stadium on Friday night." I said, we have a great relationship with our police. We know the student who reportedly was going to bring a gun. He will not be at school that day. He does not have a gun, by the way, and never had one at school. And we have, undercover police and uniformed police, as well as our own security, blanketing that stadium. Plus, it's our parent night. So we have families who are taking off work to be at the game on Friday night, not just for football, but for marching band, for cheerleading, for volleyball. It's our recognizing our athletes and their parents. And we need the gate. We're we're a poor district. We need the gate too. We can't, And he said, "Well, I'll go back and talk to my board." And I said, "Well, if you guys can't work it out, then let's call the high school athletic association." So I called my football coach and told him, what was happening, and to prepare for, whatever eventuality might come of it. I get a phone call back from Tim on Thursday morning, and he says, "Well, we're going to have a call with the athletic association at 1 o'clock this afternoon." So he jumped the gun and went to the athletic association. I got on the phone with them together, and the athletic association told me the same thing. You can either take your kids up to Ames and play the game at Ames Stadium, or you can wait until Saturday afternoon and play it at Williams Stadium, East Field, or you can forfeit. And we have a lot of our kids work on the weekends. A lot of them work during the school day, and that was going to, either a bunch of kids were going to miss a paycheck so that they could play, and their family would suffer because of it. And I said, this is really ridiculous. If all you need to do to avoid playing a game is, capitalize on some internet rumor, we could engineer those all day long. So I went and met with my football coach on Thursday, and they were having a walk through practice, and I met with the players, a lot of whom I had as students, which made it doubly hard. And I said, "You guys were forfeiting. I'm sorry, but this is bigger than East. This is about all of Des Moines, and people avoiding, people labeling you, as the wrong side of town, as the wrong color, as the wrong language. And if we don't stand up now, they're going to walk all over us at all of our high schools." And the good thing is I was hoping my board would support me. They did, but it was one of those things you had to move pretty quickly. And we won the media battle in spades, and Ames ended up being very embarrassed. And our kids learned a really valuable lesson. And then, as it turns out, they didn't have to, they ended up calling it a no contest. So we didn't win, but we didn't lose. And then Ames made the playoffs and had to play their first playoff game at Williams Field and got demolished by West Des Moines. So there was some poetic justice at the end. But, you know, those things, that was a tough one to deal with in the moment. In retrospect, it seems pretty simple, but it was really hard at the time to try to weigh everything in a very compressed period of time, feeling like all of the institutions were against what we knew was the right thing. And then it sparked a long conversation after that, which helped make some improvements in the athletic association's decision-making when issues like that surfaced, which, you know, which they do from time to time.
Thank you.
Very good. You may have just answered the next question with that answer. So this question's about the political nature of the position of state superintendent. Michigan's political landscape is complex. Tell us about a time when you advanced an educational policy or initiative in a politically sensitive context. How did you build support while focusing on students? Who was the opposition and how did you work with them?
I'm going to talk about, I did this actually 2 different times. I had way more than 2 attempts, so I'm just going to put that out there. But I had a real need to better support our English language learner students because it's less like this now. But in Iowa, there are a significant number of ELL students. But for instance, the last district that I taught in, a third of our students were ELL, but they were almost all Spanish speaking, which is a simpler challenge to address than in Des Moines, where 23% of our kids are English language learners, but they speak over 100 different languages. And many of them land in Des Moines as refugees who are not educated in their home language. You know, so it's not a matter of transfer. It's learning a language academically, you know, speaking. So once my board, which was easy to convince that this needed to be one of our legislative priorities, I contacted my counterparts around the state who had a significant percentage of ELL students and asked them if, you know, I kind of talked through what I was thinking of, and what I was thinking of was just a simple increase in the percentage of weighting for ELL students. There was that year there was a split House, Senate. One party had the House and one had the Senate, Republican governor. And the important thing, like it is in Michigan, is you need representation from around the state, because if you look at how the state house is comprised, you need that variety of voices, and part of it is educating, because you know the representatives around Detroit, for instance, have a different perception of what the pressing issues are compared to districts way up in the UP. So you have to make sure that you're translating the challenge into a context that's meaningful for as many audiences as you can, and then you show that there's a need beyond just what I'm seeing. But I had colleagues from every corner of the state expressing the same idea. I found somebody to sponsor the bill in the Senate, and so then it was a matter of making sure that we were having conversations with almost district by district, House district by House district. The Senate is a lot easier in Iowa to navigate than the House. But we had wide-ranging conversations. We're able to answer, and then we would come together, those who were pushing for it, share notes. What are we missing? What information is being asked that we don't have at the ready? Making sure that we could be well informed. After that, we got about half of what we asked for, and then the governor decided to put together a task force to look at the issue broadly, and we came back to what the task force had come up with a couple of times and didn't get any results. And then the third time, we got recognition for different weighting, kind of like you do with special education, for different types of ELL challenges. So if a student was living in poverty and was ELL and was not, and was a refugee, they got a higher level of funding than a second generation American-born student who still spoke a second language as the primary language in the home. And so while it made a very small, it was a very small financial ask for the state, which made it pretty easy to get past, it made a huge impact to those districts that had that monumental struggle of trying to compress an entire K-12 education into 5 or 6 years for those students who were who came in with no background.
Talking about politically sensitive contexts and advancing or keeping an educational policy, here in Michigan, there's videos connected to the Michigan Department of Education instructing teachers and administrators how to hide in the computer systems, when report cards go out or at parent-teacher conferences, that pronouns are being used that the parents aren't aware of, alternate names, the bathrooms, kids might be going to a different bathroom or locker room, then their gender is assigned. And I've even had, and by the way, and when Governor Whitmer was running for re-election in 2022, she condemned these videos, but nonetheless, our current superintendent has defended them. I even had Lansing kindergarten teachers, 2 of them, quit because they were told that they had to ask the kindergartners what name and what gender you wanted to be referred to, and they were unable to even, the teachers were unable to tell the parents, so they quit. So if you are appointed state superintendent, will you work to stop these and any other efforts to deceive or withhold important information from parents?
Dr. A, before you answer that, there's a lot, you're leading people to a response, and that's unfair. You should just ask the question that you're asking so that they can answer them. Most of all the questions that we're asking, we leave it for the candidate to respond. You give a lot of leading information, Tom. That may be misleading.
Okay,
We may
let me
interpret
make
it
shorter.
differently.
There's
Yeah.
some videos that have been controversial that are connected to instructing teachers and administrators how to hide this information about pronouns, names from parents during on the report cards, parent-teacher conferences, and they've been condemned by even Governor Whitmer at the time.
Just what's
Would
the
you
question?
would you oppose that kind of effort here? Because our current state superintendent is defending.
Who I guess I'm unclear. Who's posting these videos and where are they being posted?
With Michigan Department of Education.
I'm sorry, I missed
They're
that.
connected with the Michigan Department of Education.
It's professional development videos.
Yeah.
And these are in
Without
compliance of state law?
yeah, without you being able to draw your own conclusion or without seeing these videos, I would rather there be a specific question that you are asking, because there will be differences of opinion as to what the purpose of the videos are for, and how the videos are used.
Okay, well, I
And
can
so-
make it real simple then. Do you support districts and teachers withholding information about the pronouns that their kids are used at, in the bathrooms that they're using from parents?
Well, generally speaking, no. It seems like that would be something that
Okay.
was generally known.
Okay, thank you. Move on. Number 8, collaborative relationship building. Give an example of how you built and sustained a successful partnership with a group like unions, families, tribal nations, legislators, and what evidence can you share that made it successful? Example of how you built and sustained a successful partnership with a group like unions, families. What
Yeah.
elements can you share that made it successful?
When I first became superintendent, I had a union, the gentleman who had been elected the president of the teachers union, um, had to resign before he actually took office. And so the vice president, who I think the Teachers Association really didn't take that election seriously, became president by default. He was an extremely negative gentleman, um, who I didn't know. I had never met him, but he immediately began spreading initially generic, just sort of negative messaging about the administration in general, and then and then occasionally would have individual pokes at me, all completely untrue, because people would forward them to me. And so I had a standing meeting with the association leadership every month. And so when I would get those, I would just show them to him and ask, what's going on here? This is patently false. And it's not productive. It's not helping us get anywhere. So that was how I addressed it with him. He was difficult to speak rationally with. And I certainly didn't want to pick a fight, but I also, the relationship that we had with the teachers was very important. In fact, I had been in my last teaching job, I was the president of my local association and was our chief negotiator. I had no problem with, in principle, with the teachers union, but this guy made it really difficult. When he was voted out after a couple of years, I think they had 2-year terms, they elected a new president, and we got to know each other slowly but surely. And I invited the association leadership into lots of decision making. For instance, when I put my COVID-19 response team together, we had the president appointed 2 of his representatives to serve on the committee. When collective bargaining all but was eviscerated in Iowa in 2016, we were able to maintain really positive relationships with our teachers association. Just because we continued to include them in discussions, they helped us. I put together a health benefits advisory committee, for instance, that allowed all of our employee groups, even though we couldn't bargain it anymore, to talk about health benefits and figure out the best way to keep as much money in our paychecks as possible while still providing the level of health coverage that we needed. And that worked, I can say, because in my last couple of years as superintendent, both the state association and the local teachers association gave me their highest award. Another example I would give is when I created an alternative teacher contract, we started a relationship with Drake University where we created from scratch our own master's degree called a Master's of Science in Culturally Responsive Leadership in Education. And it was truly from scratch. There was nothing like it anywhere. And we started that, I negotiated that contract in the spring of 2012. And we had and then we went through a whole selection process with universities from around the country. Drake University in Des Moines won the final bid. And so 3 years later, we had that master's degree accredited, and it is still thriving today. And our new teacher retention rate after 5 years was 95%, which is unheard of, especially in an urban district. The teachers found it very valuable. They got tons of support in their first 2 years, which was really what created the stickiness for us. But those teachers stayed with us. We provided the master's degree, and the master's degree did what we wanted it to do. It did what our colleges of education weren't doing a good job of, and that is serving a very diverse student population. And that's probably something I'm most proud of in my career. Building on that relationship with Drake, we negotiated a really novel agreement 3 years ago where Drake sold us a chunk of land next to their basketball arena for $1, and we built Together, we built a $30 million state-of-the-art soccer and football stadium. The district owns it. We paid for about 2/3 of it. The district continues to own it. We'll have no general fund expense moving forward. Drake's responsible for maintenance and upkeep. And it's their Division I women's and men's soccer venue, home soccer venue. And it also provides a stadium that competes with the very wealthy suburbs around Des Moines for the Des Moines kids to have an awesome football and soccer stadium to compete in. The only way to get it done at all of our high schools, it was fiscally impossible. You know, it would have taken 100 years to get that done. And that took risk, both from the president of Drake University and from me and my board. But after about a year of, you know, working it out, that's now been open and functioning very well for 2 years. The master's degree provides about half the graduate students in the Drake School of Education. So that continues to go very well. So I think and there's a bunch of other things I could talk about, but, you know, just being forthright, being clear about what it is that the problem is, and not, you know, I'm big on under promise and over deliver, and do that consistently so that people know that there's integrity when you enter into a relationship.
So the next question is from me. If you can describe a situation where you face significant resistance or criticism from an important stakeholder group, somewhat similar, how did you handle it and what principles guided your action?
Oh, well, okay, this is again, education adjacent or academic adjacent. Um, my chief operations officer and I had been trying to figure out how to bring some level of equity to our high schools regarding athletics, and we came up with this idea of a community stadium. I mean, it wasn't a unique idea. Other districts have done it, but they do it on the front end, not once they've established a stadium for everyone. And so when I made this proposal and got my board to agree that this was the way forward, I took, you know, I kind of took the show on the road, and I had two of my 5 high schools who had a segment of their population that were vehemently opposed to not having their competitions on their campuses stadiums. And so this was very unpleasant at first for me, because I learned a lot from it. I was so sure that it was such a brilliant idea that I underestimated how much resistance there would be. So after the first round of public meetings, I had to really look at myself in the mirror and say, okay, what are you missing here? What, you know, how is it that you're not connecting with these groups? And so I figured out who was leading these groups. You know, there was certain parents. And so I invited them to have coffee or to come to my office, or I meet them at their office, whatever, and had a bunch of one-on-one conversations with the influencers. I didn't get all of them on board, I will tell you that. But I did convince some of them to see the advantages, especially long-term, because we were going to be able to invest a lot of money onto their campuses once the stadium was done, and make up for a bunch of other shortfalls that we were behind on. But the biggest thing it did was temper the vehemence behind the initial opposition. And I had to realize that, you know, there are everybody's coming from a different perspective, and not everybody can see the same picture that I can see, because they don't have my vantage point. And frankly, I don't have their vantage point either. So I can't see everything the way they see it, and not be so, I guess, so ego involved in an idea that's mine, to be able to really hear um, legitimate pushback or concern with it, and do that from the beginning, not learn that halfway through the process.
Thank
So the
you.
principles were, I always kept it on what's best for students, and secondly, from a resource perspective, which was always part of every discussion, it seems like, um, showing how we were actually going to be serving all high schools more equitably if we took this move, and that it would be years and years, if ever, that we could reach that level of experience for our kids, if we didn't make that move.
Thank you.
This is a question pertaining to literacy. The state of Michigan legislature has enacted a multifaceted literacy law, which is meant to directly assist children, particularly those in pre-K through third grade, with improving their literacy skills. Please share with us your impression and knowledge of these bills. And as state superintendent, how would you lead the department, the intermediate school districts, RESAs, and local districts in implementing and monitoring the effects of these laws? Additionally, could you tell us what part, if any, you played in informing or providing support for similar laws in your state prior to enactment, if they exist?
Yeah, am I correct in understanding that there is no longer a third grade retention?
That is correct.
That's what I thought, okay. I think that's the right move, by the way. Um, what I think I can be pretty effective with, and this might sound, like um, fluff, but it really isn't, is because, and it's not because what have we done? What impact have these laws had, or the laws before them, and creating that sense of urgency. Not to create shame, but, to really up the ante, the personal ante that our educators have in our schools, especially that have been persistently underserving our kids. Um, I know it can get done in any school. I have experience getting it done in virtually any description of school. But you have to be willing to let go of practices that clearly have not worked. We have the system that's perfectly designed to get what we're getting. And until we recognize that and are willing to change, and by change I don't mean more. We have to change actually behaviors, what we're doing. We can't squeeze more into the day. We can't ask more of our teachers. They're working very hard, but are they working smart within a system that's allowing them to do their best work? So I cite this Drucker quote all the time, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. So do we have a culture that is a culture of belief in what we can do and what our kids can do? And then W. Edwards Deming, a good person will get beat by a bad system every time. So we have to look at our system, and I'm talking school by school, but I talked about, so for instance, one of the things we have to look at is, are our principals equipped, and are they working in a system that allows them to provide high quality instructional coaching for their teachers, to make sure that we're getting the job done every day, because we have to get the job done every day. Two, are we systematically preventing some of our most underserved kids from getting access to grade level curriculum because we're supposedly providing them extra support? This is a huge problem that is way too often overlooked, because we'll take students who are supposed to receive additional support because they qualify for Title I services, and they get it when their peers are getting grade level instruction. They're never going to catch up if they're never exposed to grade level instruction. We have to draw a hard line on that. That's not fair to the kids, and then frankly, it's not fair to the teachers either. So we have to get more creative with our scheduling if we can't figure out how to get that done. Same goes for ELL students. They can't get pull-out instruction during core, their pull-out additional instruction during core instruction, certainly not during literacy core instruction, or they're never going to catch up. And so we have to come down hard on that and make sure that that's not happening. Because of course, the kids who don't need extra support because they're already reading at grade level when they come into the system never need to be pulled from grade level instruction because they're not being provided extra support. But the extra support has to be extra, not in place of. That sounds simple, but you'd be surprised how often that happens. Next, let's look at our calendars. As strange as that seems, we have schools around the country have typically about the same calendar, 180 some days, some odd days. And it's spread out over, either starting in late August or early September and getting out late May or early June. We didn't have the resources. I couldn't figure out how to get the resources to add more days to my schedule when I was a superintendent. But what I did do, what I did was actually reduce the number of instructional days without reducing the instructional time. So we increased the number of minutes that we were in school each day, which helped in part to solve the pulling kids out of core instruction. But what I told my teachers and my parents, let's quit thinking about the school year as a marathon. Okay? Don't think of day 1 through day 180. We're going to break it into 4 sprints. And so we called them learning cycles. And so they were about 8 or so weeks. They weren't all exactly even, but they were pretty consistent. So we would start in the fall, go 8.5 weeks really hard. Kids would get about 3 days off, and the staff would get 1 day off, and then come back and really do a deep dive on their data that that was a result of the first 8.5 weeks. And in their professional learning communities, got really high and tight on what's working, what's not working, how do we make adjustments for this next sprint. And as a system, we had really good quarterly data, and we made adjustments in that time. And then we did another learning cycle, and then we had winter break, and then we had another learning cycle and spring break, which looked really long because we had those additional days off, and then we had that final learning cycle. Once families got accustomed to that, which we made those changes gradually over time, it really helped. The teachers loved it because they felt like they could go really hard and they would actually get a real break. We actually had more minutes of instruction, plus our students who needed it, we had those extended breaks, they actually got additional time. It wasn't in school with their teacher, but they were getting supervised tutoring during those break times. So in essence, they netted additional instructional time. So we have to look at all of the tools at our disposal. And as I tried to state, but I don't think I did clearly right at the beginning of the interview, there are a lot of things that we sort of just accept as that's how school works, and we can look at that more strategically. And as a Department of Education, we can help schools look at some of those resource issues and figure out how to use the same amount of resources in a more strategic way. Another thing that I think a lot of districts can probably do a little bit better job on, if their boards are supportive of it, is really looking at that student to teacher ratio from a K-12 perspective and making sure that we're keeping those class sizes smallest K through 3. Because honestly, there's not an ounce of research that says we need to have, class sizes of less than 20 at high school. That's a selling point a lot of districts make, but there's there's not a shred of evidence to say that that's helpful, but there sure is in mastering early literacy and giving these teachers a fighting chance at being successful by not having 25 students whose skills vary from here to here, and trying to differentiate with that big of a group of students and keeping those class sizes a lot smaller. And now, to be honest with you, I've lost the original question, and I don't even know if I've
That's
answered
okay.
it.
I'm going to ask a follow-up that's, specific to literacy, but then also adjacent to funding.
Before you do that, can we speed it up? Because
Yeah.
we're running out of time.
Sure.
Okay.
So school funding in Michigan is one of the most difficult models in the nation. Michigan residents have communicated frustration with understanding where money comes from and where it goes. $87 million were allocated for the literacy changes our state needs in the last budget. 550 school districts applied for these dollars. Our department approved local district budgets and successfully selected applicants for the entirety of the $87 million and released that list of districts statewide. Do you support the notion of a required reporting of approved budgets for categoricals and grants to local citizens so they can see line item spending and understand how far this money is going in the name of literacy?
I wouldn't go so far as line item, but if we could go a step back from line item, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Because, well, just we want to make sure that we're sharing these dollars in, first of all, according to how they were approved legislatively, and secondly, as equitably as possible. And if you don't have transparency around that, then it doesn't, it matters to the kids that you did it right, but it doesn't matter to public trust whether you did it right or not if they can't confirm that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have the next question. It's going to be about being authentic, humble, and trustworthy. Leadership often involves acknowledging mistakes.
Mhm.
Share an instance where you changed your mind based on new information or feedback. How did you communicate the change and what did you learn? I know you use one example, but perhaps you have another.
Oh, yeah. Where I've been proven wrong. Yeah. Coming up with just one. I'm trying to think. Would you mind repeating that one more time?
Absolutely. Authentic, humble, and trustworthy. Leadership often involves acknowledging mistakes. Share an instance where you changed your mind based on new information or feedback. How did you communicate the change and what did you learn?
Okay. I made a decision. Well, I made the decision in my own mind and shared it with my, in my mind it was obvious that our elementary schools did not need a dean position. So we had principals and we had deans, and the deans were they handled most of the low-level behavior things. They helped out with some professional development. It kind of varied by building, but all of our schools had a principal and then also had a dean. And having visited a lot of our schools, and looking at our data, we had all these people who were serving as deans that never even attempted to become a principal. They were just, they weren't teaching. They weren't, their skill set wasn't strong in instruction, so they weren't in a position to really do what I wanted leadership to do at the building level. And so I had this brilliant idea that we would no longer have deans, and we could come up with a different position that perhaps could even be shared among buildings to take care of the kind of the tedium that our, and I had never worked in an elementary school. I'll put that out there too. And I was so proud because this was going to be not only a significant savings in dollars, but it was also going to be an opportunity for us to tell more clearly what kind of game our elementary principals had in terms of coaching for instructional improvement. I shared this with my chiefs team, which was my just a group of 5: my CFO, my COO, my chief academic officer, my chief schools officer, and chief human resources officer, and got immediate pushback from not only my chief academic officer, but also my chief schools officer. But boy, it was hard for them to make their argument cogently with the look I must have had on my face, that I was pretty darn certain that it was right. So they were forceful enough that after the meeting, I kind of pushed the clutch in, and I called some of the older principals that I had a really high degree of trust in and who had really gotten good results over time. And they set me straight. And so what we ended up doing was we did pull the dean position back, but only from our smallest buildings, and left them at all the rest of them. And we made some more refinements later on, which was a much more productive approach to solving the challenge that I was really trying to fix. So I certainly learned a lesson there, and it certainly brought our team closer together because there was an increased level of confidence that they were able to push back against me, or against my ideas that I brought to the table, and that I would listen, and common sense would rule in the end.
Thank you.
Over here.
Yes, sir.
How have you integrated the arts, mental health, or social emotional learning into the educational experience? And how do you define success beyond test scores?
Well, with the arts, back in whatever year, 2000 something, I don't remember what year it was, there was a federal grant that you could apply for called a Turnaround Arts Program. And 6 schools in the country won these grants, individual buildings. And so I recruited an elementary principal in my district to apply for the grant. And they were successful in winning it. And what that did, it provided a little bit of money, not very much, because that wasn't really the focus of it, but they got partnered with artists. So we had a very famous actor that was a partner for our school that he made a few visits to the school, but he would call and do FaceTime meetings with our students, and then contracted with the federal program were some other artists, musical artists, visual artists, that came in and not just help the students with art, but the real focus was on building their confidence and their ability to express themselves. So we were clearly the most successful school in that grant team. And so I got to know the federal grantees pretty well. And so they called me. I remember this conversation really clearly because I felt very manipulative. But they said, well, so we have funding for a second round of grants. What would you change? And I said, well, I think it would be really powerful if you could have a whole, like feeder system apply for the grant and really get, some momentum behind this program in a whole part of a city. And so they wrote the application, and it was perfectly suited to the rest of the two other elementaries in that feeder pattern, the middle school, where I used to be a principal, and the high school um, that they fed into. And so the whole north side of Des Moines became this turnaround arts um, program, and it really got our families engaged because they could see hands-on things that our students were doing. Our students really improved their connectedness with the school, sense of pride in school. And that grant lasted 2 years, both of them lasted 2 years. But all of those practices we just maintained because they were very beneficial. We didn't have, unfortunately, these big time artists coming in and visiting the schools anymore, but we didn't need to. It helped discipline issues in all of the participating schools, and it really elevated teacher family relationships, and an increased sense of pride, not just with the students, but with the students' families. And what was the second part of your question?
How do you define success beyond test scores?
Okay, so like, and I don't have a way to measure this exactly yet, but I've been wrestling with this just myself. But I really like the concept of developing student agency and actively helping students understand that who they are is a product of the decisions they make and the actions they take. And I use that kind of language all the time when dealing with student behavior. But if we were really talking about helping students develop agency, they become more critical consumers of their education. They become more strategic in how it is that they navigate their way through our school systems. They become more clear-headed about what it is they want from their K-12 education to set them up for success beyond K-12, and it helps them have more fruitful conversations, not just with their counselors, but with their teachers and with administrators. I really believe in student voice and getting students active in helping improve the experiences that they have. And as a superintendent, my student advisory team was very helpful in solving, for instance, not solving, but helping improve our chronic absenteeism issue, which I know has been a problem in Michigan. Um, I brought kids. I built the team, the student team, specifically with kids from all of our high schools that represented all of our populations, but that were those kids that tended to be sort of invisible. I wasn't looking for the A students. I was looking for kids who are sort of those C students that show up every day but aren't necessarily noticed. And I'll tell you, if you get them engaged and you give them a platform to be honest about what they're experiencing in school, they can really help inform what we're doing wrong. And one of the things that I was so proud of them about was they wanted to talk to all of the secondary students in the district, all 15,000 of them. And so I got my director of assessment, data, and evaluation together with them. They built a survey. Those kids were motivated and having all the kids' voices in the room. We had about a 98% participation rate. And when the kids sat down with my evaluation team to break down the results, there were some things that were pretty uncomfortable for us to hear, especially our teachers. And we had some real tough conversations with teacher leadership that our students took part in, because this wasn't, they weren't enemy making, they were just telling the truth of their experience. And some of those students actually were motivated enough that with some support, they provided professional development that our principals could order to their schools to help our teachers understand how their behavior was being interpreted by by the students, and why it was that they were feeling either invisible or excluded from the school experience. So I think if we have the courage to get the student voice in the room, we can make some pretty impactful changes to what they're experiencing, and again, building agency is really where that's where I see the magic in the educational process. You can tell when a kid's really engaged and really feels in charge of where they're going. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're a straight A student, but it's one you're not worried about where they're going once they leave your care.
Thank you.
So I would like for us to get through all of the questions, and we only have like 5 minutes to get
Yeah,
through.
I'll keep my answers shorter.
Yeah, if you could keep the answers short, and then we'll hold off on any follow-up questions until the end.
If selected for this opportunity, and you have a dual role, both state superintendent and board chair, how will you ensure all members' voices are heard and included in key decisions? Secondly, can you share an experience or two where you successfully managed conflicts between board members or board members and yourself or a similar executive body?
Sure. In Des Moines, I became superintendent having served for a period of months as interim superintendent because the prior superintendent left sort of under a dark cloud. And there were a group of 4 of my board members who wanted nothing in the district to have even the appearance of having been touched by the prior superintendent. And then there were 3 other ones who were new, relatively new, and hadn't worked with the prior superintendent very much. So I was working as the interim and didn't know the board members very well because I had only spent 10 months in central office as associate superintendent prior to that. But it was very clear that we had a split board. When they went to hire, they did a national search, and I was one of 3 finalists when they finally got to that point. And the head of the search firm called me one night after all the interviews were concluded, and he said, they want to offer you the job, and if you say yes right now, I think I can get 5, maybe even 6 yes votes. And I said, right then, I said, look, and I won't use his name because some of you may know him. I said, let's not pretend this is anything other than what it is. It's a 4-3 board. I get it, but I'll accept. And so what I started doing immediately was meeting with individual board members as much as they would allow me to, just to, and mostly listen. And one board member who was particularly opposed, not to me personally, because he didn't even know me, but because I had been hired by the previous superintendent, he became, one of my best board members once he was able to get past that issue. And so I made it a strategy to, first of all, make sure I'm communicating with all my board members consistently. So every week was my cadence as a superintendent. I would send a memo that covered every department in the district, and every board member got it at exactly the same time. And it said the exact same things. I obviously met with the board chair and vice chair more frequently because we had to do agenda planning. And then I met at the discretion of each of the board members. If, some members wanted a lot more of a touch from me, some of them, just didn't feel like they needed it. But I just tried to meet each board member where they were. And I was religious about meeting with the chair and vice chair if I saw any evidence of the board or my staff not following board policy. And I intentionally did it on very minor things so that when some major things came up, which did come up, there was already a kind of a cadence to that, and it didn't feel as shocking. So and then the other piece of that I will tell you is that so I got hired by a 4-3 board. We had 7 board members, and in 10 years I served with 20 different board members. So it seemed like every year somebody was giving up their seat because of either moving away or some side issue. And so found myself in this constant culture building stance, I guess you will. And that actually, even though it was time intensive, it was a really good pattern to get into, to not take for granted any individual members' predilections or guess where they stood, on a particular issue, but listen with an open mind in every discussion, and then act with integrity and make sure that if I have to call foul, I call foul with transparency and integrity, so that we work through small things before they become big things.
And we're at 3:14, so I am going to thank you for coming to interview with us. And you will hear from HYA at the conclusion of our day tomorrow as to which direction we will be going in.
Okay.
And we thank you for coming before us.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It was a privilege, and I'm sorry I didn't allow enough time for all the questions.
This is good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Board, we will take a brief recess, and we will come back at 3:30 p.m. so that we can complete our final interview and then take public comment and stay on target. Thank you.